Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about the value of optimizing your organization, and joining us to contribute to the conversation is Ann Hill. Welcome, Ann.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I started off in the online space about 4 years ago. Prior to that, I was a rehab manager at a skilled nursing facility. I worked as a physical therapist and loved what I did there. But similar to many people in the healthcare industry, got a little burnout with the healthcare industry and decided to look for something new. I found the online space, got involved in an operations certification program, and really dove fully into being able to help businesses similarly to how I used to help them as a rehab manager, but really help more on that back end side, working with the systems, working with the processes, working with efficiency, and really helping business owners to be able to grow their business in a successful way and not get the burnout that I experienced when I was in the healthcare industry.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit then about obviously, how do corporations as they grow end up, I guess, less than optimized? What kind of contributes to the lack of efficiency and organization that so many larger companies seem to experience?
It can have to do with just, as you grow, I think there's different tiers that happen with the business. So initially, when it's a small group of people, 5, 10 people, you're able to make do, people communicate in certain ways and everything happens the way that it does. But as you start to add on more team members, communication methods don't always work the same way that they used to. The systems that you had where, people may have been wearing multiple hats may not work the same way. So there's growing pains that businesses go through with their processes. And if they're not willing to evolve and adjust them as they go, then that's where they run into the issues where things are not as optimized. And especially when there's not a structure and standardization to the communication, or if there is no communication, even more so, there's issues with the ability for the team to cohesively work together.
Well, maybe let's talk a little bit about companies who are scaling then, and maybe there's even some preventative measures that they can take. So, as somebody, or sorry, as a company is growing, what should the leaders be doing as they say move from 50 to 100 and then 100 to say 300? What are some of the things they should be doing to maybe get ahead of this so that they don't have a problem?
Well, definitely having some of the foundational structure with regard to HR, with regard to having everybody on the team going through a specific just company training, and then getting into the specific departments and that sort of stuff and the skills that they need to know, but having an overall understanding of what the company stands for, what the company does, and just really making sure that everybody's on the same page and working towards the same goals, big picture wise, is key to really helping a team as they're growing continue to have that same passion for what they do and how they fit into the big puzzle.
And so that always sounds really easy in words, but so many companies actually, have a hard time keeping people, I guess, flying in formation. So, what are some of the tools that companies can use to help create alignment?
I think that it starts from the top and goes down from there. So making sure that your leadership team is all on the same page, and starting with that, making sure that everybody has the same understanding of what the business is working towards, what the goals are, what the values of the business are, and that everybody has that same awareness and understanding will definitely help to make sure that as they are hiring people and as the tiers go down from there, that the people that are being brought on more of that direct level and that direct line of team and of the direct care people, that they are able to still follow suit. And then knowing that, back that you're able to basically communicate with your direct, not only your direct reports, but also that the direct reports are able to communicate with you as the manager, and knowing that they are able to express themselves and not be afraid to communicate if they do see issues is another part that you want to make sure that you pay attention to too.
All right. And let's say now that we're a larger company, maybe we're 1,000 people, and we realize that we're not um we're not very efficient. What are, how do you start to kind of, what are the symptoms, I guess, first of all, let's start there. What are some of the things I might be seeing to identify that I have a problem?
One area definitely has to do with revenue, where you'll get kind of stuck at a same threshold and not be able to get over a certain threshold revenue wise. You'll start to see that people will either kind of not really slack on what they're doing, but the people on the team will just not be as motivated, not be as interested in doing the same thing over and over and over again. And they may not feel that they have they may feel that they don't have value to bring to the table at a certain point, either because it hasn't been listened to in the past, or if they're just saying, well, this is just the way that it is and I can't change it anyways type mentality. Those sort of things you'll start to see from the rest of the team too.
Hmm. And so when, how would you say that we best determine which areas to focus on? Because I assume that it's probably, multi-function issues, especially, handoffs probably are one of the big areas of inefficiency. So how do I assess my, operational landscape and decide, where to get started and where basically that I'll get my biggest, ROI?
Every business is going to be a little different with regard to what needs to be that first priority, but there's definitely the awareness of seeing what are the big areas where either there's high turnover in staff, or big areas where you're seeing that things are not progressing the way that you're expecting them to. So it's looking at the metrics and then seeing where are we becoming stagnant and where are things not moving. When you're looking at those metrics in the business and you're seeing that things are becoming more stagnant, then you can start to take a little bit more of that deeper dive in that area. It definitely is something that the leadership needs to be communicating, but then you also need to talk to the team, talk to the people that are doing the work day in, day out, and get their impression, get some opinion from them on what's clunky, what seems like there should be a better way, but we just haven't addressed it yet, or we haven't looked at it, or get feedback and get the perspective of the people doing the work too.
Mm. And what are some of the metrics? I mean, you mentioned turnover and revenue. Are there other things that you could look at to kind of see that there is an issue?
So productivity in general is usually something that can be looked at to see if, again, it's those areas where things are just sticking and you're not making any improvements, you're not making any progress, whether it's month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year. And it's just, we can't seem to get over this hurdle, and the goals are at a higher point, but we can't seem to get over this hurdle. So those are probably some of the key ones that I see operationally typically have to do with the productivity of the team, and then looking at the top line revenue, looking at even sales metrics sometimes can play a role in that as well. So looking at the metrics though, and getting a feel for what's going on behind the scenes, and not just go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just saying, get a feel for what's going on behind the scenes with it, and not just looking at numbers, but truly getting more of an understanding of this isn't moving forward. And this is an area where we're putting time and energy into it. We're monitoring it. We're measuring it. Something's got to be going on here that we haven't addressed and we haven't paid attention to yet.
All right. Well, and so let's say you narrow in on a department, then what are some of the things then that you do, to start getting that, more efficient, and really examining, what's going to have the biggest impact?
Well, I like to start with looking and having conversations with people. So that's where I say, really diving into not just the department head, but also having conversations with people doing the work, and seeing what they're seeing, and get more of their perspective on it. Sometimes the people that have the best ideas are people that are in it day in and day out, and they just they see where they see what the issues are there, but it's collaborating with those people and really working as a whole, and working, as a group to make the right next moves for them.
And then, I guess one of the, well, maybe you tell me when they start going through these changes, what are the biggest challenges that they might, come across and face?
We definitely are creatures of habit. And so being able to make those changes and take small steps to make those changes can be hard sometimes. And it's just, making sure that we're holding each other accountable, that we are, making strides and referring back to, oh, the new way that we do this now instead of the old way. Look at the new way that we do this, and really just continuing to reiterate step by step in making those changes.
Mm. And then, how do you know when it's actually working? And how long does it take, I guess, to start seeing an impact?
Well, and that's going to depend on exactly what it is that you're trying to make a change on, for how long it will take to see the impact. Most changes, especially if you're looking at larger groups of people that are involved in it, if it's 1 or 2 people, then yeah, you can see those changes come together pretty quickly. But if it's a group of 50 that you're looking at, then it usually takes longer to get those changes in place and to really see the movement starting to go forward with that.
Mm. And so what about, I mean, I guess, a lot of these issues aren't, uh, usually they're cross departmental. So is that harder to get people aligned across multiple departments?
Yeah, well, there's definitely a need to, look initially at the big picture and then dive into the root cause of it. So yeah, especially in business in general, everything that we do impacts other areas. There isn't one spot of it that isn't going to impact another area in the business. So exactly like you're saying, where it all crosses, you want to get to the heart of it and do that root cause analysis with it first, though, and start at that foundational level. Typically is more so on one department versus another. And then as you're improving one side of it, that's when you can start to bring in the second department, potentially third department with it. But you need to start with one before you move on to trying to see how all of the pieces fit together.
Is that, there's a term I've come across, and maybe, I don't know if you have, called systems thinking. Is
I have
that
not come across that.
okay? And I'm kind of wondering if it's kind of tied to this, where it's, how do you approach work systematically and leverage, I could be wrong because it's been so long, but leverage, how those systems are working, and and how they're interconnected to best optimize the solution. But and I guess another thing I've come across is that, how do you optimize for the whole? Because sometimes I think we get too narrowly focused, and we might fix one thing that has unintended consequences. Have you seen that? Like, let's fix this process, but by fixing this process, you didn't take into account other processes, and then actually made whole your whole system less efficient.
Well, yeah, there is definitely that risk. And that's where that root cause analysis is really critical in figuring out, how does this play a role in everything else? Because it is all intertwined. It's hard to really take one piece of a business and only impact the one piece. I don't know if I could even name an example offhand that would truly only be one piece of a business and not impact other areas of the business as well. Especially when you're looking at processes and when you're looking at systems in a business, they are very intertwined. Whether we intend on it or not, they are intertwined.
And so how do you follow, I guess, coming from maybe somebody who hasn't done this before? I mean, obviously we can take for granted when you say, oh, you've got to look at all the processes, but what's the practical approach to that? Because I'm sure there's some people who haven't done that, and so they don't really even know what that means to look at all their processes. I've been in, we've consulted in a lot of companies don't even have documented processes. So
Right.
how do you address this, or approach it?
Well, yeah, and it's a lot of initially, especially if they don't have any sort of documented process, or they haven't really figured out what their systems are or what their processes are. It's definitely a lot of conversation and a lot of reverse engineering from it. And so, I'm getting the conversation with, whether it's the business owner, the department heads, team leads, that sort of thing, but I'm having the conversations with them. And then I'm basically having to reverse engineer what doesn't currently exist to then figure out, okay, we don't have these things documented. We can't refer back to this, but we know that this is going to impact these other 5 areas too. So now we need to take that and look at these other 5 areas and see what the impacts are here before making any big changes and adjustments.
Mm. And so, and then how do you approach kind of like what the future state should look at like then, I assume you've got your current state and you're like, oh, I want to optimize this. And so how do you dream up what the possibilities are, or even, to streamline things?
I go off of having conversations with the business owner, having conversations with CEOs, having conversations with the high C-suite level people, because I actually don't really classify myself as much of the visionary side of it, but if they give me what they're looking for and what their ultimate goal is, again, it's that reverse. I feel like I'm good at reverse engineering it, but I want to get an idea from them of really what those visions are before we can then start to build out reverse engineering and what the processes need to look like in order to be at that level of what their vision is.
How often do you think organizations should be, reviewing these and kind of asking themselves whether or not they're truly optimized? I mean, obviously you can't be revamping things every 6 months or something.
No,
That's
definitely
very
not.
disruptive. So yeah, how do you get a good cadence for looking at this stuff?
I think that it should be looked at. I don't think that it should be necessarily like majorly revamped, but I do think annually you should at least kind of be looking at and pick different areas of the business just to focus on and do it in a phased approach of, okay, this year we're really going to focus a little bit more on HR. This year we're going to focus a little bit more on our financial side. And this year we're going to focus a little bit more on this area and just get that overview of what's going on and then see, are there glaring issues that we need to address with it? But as more of a phased approach of looking at it. And then also, your operations processes, they are living, breathing documents. If something needs to change with it, it needs to change. It doesn't mean that just because it was written, that's the only way that it can be done.
Right. Yeah. And so do you find that that organizations tend to do this well, or is this like something that gets ignored until it's becomes so late that it's really hard to turn around?
Yeah, well, it definitely gets ignored. It usually is something that gets put more on the back burner until there's high turnover. So that's where, until there's that fire, until you start to see a big glaring issue, people don't spend as much time on it. Once they start to dive into one area though, then they start to see the importance of reviewing the other areas too.
Mm. And then what do you find like the biggest pitfalls are, or the biggest things that, when undertaking an initiative like this, either derail it or make it so that you don't get the impact that you were really after?
I think, excuse me, I think that with some of the businesses I've worked with, they end up always having fires that they're trying to put out. And so they're not able to really do that root cause deep dive to the extent that would really be beneficial, because they start to prioritize other fires over what really is the root cause of it. So it definitely has an impact on how much impact can be had when you aren't really getting a good understanding of what the priority really should be for the business.
Mm. And then, how does this, I guess, go into like team performance then? I mean, how important is the process to how a team interacts?
Well, I've noticed that the teams that don't have structure to them are definitely not as efficient as teams that do have structure to them. If people don't know where to find things, where to go to get information, don't know how to communicate, and what the expectation is of them, the team as a whole does not operate as efficiently and as effectively as they could.
Mm. And so do you think that, is this something that causes turnover, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, when you don't have your systems set up in a way that the team can operate as optimally, then it can definitely create turnover. It can create resistance within the team, because usually one person has a certain expectation, and five other people have different expectations. And if nobody's on the same page, then it definitely makes a challenging working environment for the team.
Mm. And I mean, how important, kind of going back to that documentation piece, I mean, how important is it to have all of that documented, at what point in size of a company do they maybe even need to be thinking about that more?
Well, I mean, in all honesty, even when it's a team of one, you still should have some processes documented. But I do find that it tends to get put on the back burner. Really, I would say I've seen teams of 20, 25 that still don't necessarily have a good documented process for what it is and how they're doing what they're doing.
Mm.
Um, it makes it a lot more challenging in many ways, and especially with growth, if they don't have processes documented.
Do you find there's risks associated with that as well? And if so, what would those be?
The
Like
risks of not
not.
having documentation,
Mm.
well, at least in the operational space, the work that's being done, it could potentially be done in different ways. It could allow you to not have a consistent customer experience that you're taking clients through. It could potentially lead to you not really having a solid process for what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it. And everybody can just kind of have, and unfortunately, kind of have a free for all with it, which that doesn't necessarily set up a good structure and a foundational basis of a business if everybody is able to kind of do things in their own way and not have an overall process for how you want them to do the work that they do.
Mm. And but I guess, that's an interesting thing, is how do you, I guess, determine what should be documented in place, and what, where it's okay to leave a little bit of variability, I guess, so that people don't feel like they're robots, just following the recipe, that maybe you can add a little bit of finesse in it. Like, how do you balance some of that? Have you come across that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that especially in the space of like marketing media agencies, where there needs to be a little bit of creativity. They need to be able to have their way of doing things that they do, and the way that they, have that creative side really is what it is. And so with that, there usually is an overall framework that people should be following. There's a kind of benchmarks, big picture processes with the business and how they do what they do. And then there does need to be that little bit of creativity that they can dive in and make and create and do what they excel at and what they're best at. So as long as there's that framework that goes with it, then most of the time that works well. Without having okay, now you draw a line here, now you do this part here. Like, yes, you do need to have some of that creative side of it, as long as they're following that framework of that whole customer experience, the customer journey, and what that's going to look like to be successful in, working with, in that example, like in a marketing agency or something like that.
Yeah, and I guess there's some areas we don't want a lot of creativity. We don't want creative accounting, I suppose.
That is true.
But still, I mean, I assume there's still some, I guess, flexibility, in the sense that people want to feel some autonomy over their work. But like you
Right.
said, that autonomy has to exist within a framework or guidelines. It's like, I suppose, as a child being told, oh, well, you can ride your bike anywhere in the park, but you have to stay within the park, type, perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess, operations isn't always sexy, but there's obviously been a lot of focus on it, like from a Six Sigma perspective, and how much money you can save. And I get a sense that when companies get to a certain size where maybe the financial pressure isn't there, or they've got a lot of sales, so revenue isn't an issue, or things like that, that they just generally become more and more inefficient. How do you get people to care, I guess, or, like feel enough pain to maybe actually do something about it?
That's a, I definitely see where you're coming from with it. That's an interesting question of like, usually there's someone in the business that still that still cares about it, though, even if are sales are working well, marketing's working well, revenue's coming in. Usually somebody still has goals of why they created the business, or why they work in the position that they are, why they want to be doing what they're doing. And so there usually is still, especially with a business that's growing, there's someone that's behind the scenes that's still looking at it going, we created this, or we're a part of this because of whatever reason it is. And so it's really making sure that those people see the importance of the operation, see the importance of the structure and the systems, and then making sure that that they're the ones that are still able to trickle down with the importance of why we're doing what we're doing, even though these metrics are all looking good, or even though this area is great, there still is room for improvement. We are here to better the city, the state, the country, the whatever reason it is. And so if we're here to better these people, or this product, or this service, then how can we still do that in the best way? So it's really, again, looking at that overall culture and why the business exists, and then saying, this is the reason the business exists. Are we doing this in the best way we can be doing it right now, or not?
And when you do this work, do you tend to do introduce KPIs if there's not already in those departments? Or how important should every department have KPIs? Or
Yeah, I think every department should have KPIs, and if they don't have them, yes, I'm definitely talking to them about what potentially would be good things to be measuring and paying attention to. Because in all reality, if we don't track things, we usually aren't paying attention to them. So in order to see the progress, in order to see the improvement with it, those KPIs are definitely something that needs to be addressed and talked about.
and how, like, and obviously every department is different, but how do you suggest they start looking at KPIs? Or do you start with just industry standards? Or I mean, like, because it's always that concept, you get more of what you pay attention to, or what you measure. And
Right. Yeah.
sometimes you can measure the wrong thing and actually get, unintended consequences. Like, people start working the number and then it turns out, something else goes down. So how do you have thoughts on getting the right KPIs? And
Yeah. Well, and I really think so. I would definitely start by saying there's typically not more than, I guess every department I think needs to have metrics that they're measuring, but I think the business as a whole should really not have more than about 3 to 5 KPIs. And so looking at the KPIs are really dependent upon what the goals are and what stage of business they're in, for what needs to be those priority KPIs versus other numbers that are important in the business, but just don't necessarily need to be as focused on as the KPIs do.
Yeah. Because I've seen the ones where it's like, one of the ones that I've been seeing lately is how, with salespeople having the quarterly targets, right? And so then end of quarter, they're all making deals because they want to make their quarterly target. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
well, I can see the value of trying to chunk up maybe a yearly goal into quarters, but in some ways, I wonder if it drives bad behavior, because are you making not great deals to get?
I prefer looking at monthly metric or monthly numbers versus quarterly. I think as the business owner, as the C-suite, you're going to have your annual, quarterly metrics with it. But when it comes to the team and the people doing the work, I look at that more monthly of are they meeting metrics monthly where they need to be or not. which still
Yeah.
in some ways can lead to some of the bad behavior of the rush at the end of the month, but at least it's the end of the month versus the end of the quarter or the end of the year.
Right, right. Yeah, well, no, it's so funny because it's like, yeah, you'll be on negotiating with somebody and they're like, oh, I can give you a deal because it's the end of the quarter. And, and so you're like, well, I'll just start figuring out when every company's end of quarter is and just wait to make a deal to then. I mean, why not? So I just think it's, yeah, that's one of those ones that kind of, are we really creating the right behaviors with this?
Very true. Very good point.
But no, this has been an interesting conversation, and would love to hear, kind of what you'd want to leave with the audience, maybe your top 3 tips.
Yeah, so definitely looking as you are working with teams, I think one of the big things to be focusing on definitely is the team culture, the team just awareness and understanding of what the business exists for and why you do what you do, as well as how, like we were mentioning, how intertwined different departments are. So what you do and how you fit into the big picture of the business. And then also really the importance of communication and having those expectations, having those standards set up in a business is definitely critical too for not only the success of the team, but also just the growth of the business as a whole.
Well, and how can folks find out more about what you do or get in touch with you, Anne?
Yeah, so my website is probably the easiest way. It's hilltopoperations.com, and there's links on there if anybody wants to ever, book a call, a chat, anything like that. I'm happy to connect with people. It also has links for social media if anybody wants to connect on LinkedIn as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your insights today.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
And until next time, keep your organizations healthy.